So who's heard of the British comedian Ricky Gervais? All right. About the same as the 8 o'clock people. Well, he's a self-proclaimed loud and proud atheist, which is fine if he wants to do that. But in 2009, he had a movie called The Invention of Lying. Has anyone seen that movie? Okay. So in the movie, nobody can lie. And that's fine, except for everyone is truthful all the time, but not in a tactful way. They just kind of blurt out whatever they're on their mind, right? So one day, Ricky's character discovers that he can lie. And he's the only person that can. So then he starts doing it all the time to see what would happen. And this reading reminds me of the movie because at one point, his mother's dying. So he wants to comfort her, and he tells her about a man in the sky who, among other things, gives them free pizza, but it's about heaven. And then he becomes a prophet. Everyone starts following him. And then he tells everyone that the man in the sky is waiting for them, and if they're good, he'll give everyone their own mansion in heaven. Now, believe it or not, this isn't too far off from some interpretations of this exact passage, because this is that passage. Jesus says he's preparing the way for the people. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places, and we will have a place with him. And when we hear the word house, we think of a four-walled structure that we live inside, right? It's shelter, it's safe. It's warm in winter, cool in summer, comforting, filled with all our stuff. So, in the past, this passage has been interpreted as you will be in God's mansion in the sky. But there is more meaning behind the idea of a father's house. It's not exactly what it means, because in the Old Testament, people say that they live in the house of their father, the house of Jacob, the house of Abraham. But they didn't actually live in houses. They lived in tents. And they traveled, depending on crops, livestock, and all that. So when Abram leaves his father's house, he isn't moving out of his residence into another one on another street. He's leaving his kinship group, his tribe. His kinship group is his identity. It's who looks out for you and who you look out for. It's a large group of people. And Jesus' community has been thrown out of their kinship group, which is the temple, because they follow Jesus. So they currently are without a dwelling place, without people to have kinship with. So the Father's house and our dwelling places in it aren't physical places, but rather a place in the community, in the arms of God with Jesus. As always in the Gospel of John, a relationship with God. So since we jump around, this portion of the Gospel is actually right after Jesus tells the disciples that he's going to be betrayed and killed. So this is the Last Supper now. We've gone back in time. They are pretty upset and confused. So Jesus is offering them words of comfort and assurance. And we call this the farewell discourse. And in John, the farewell discourse is about 5 whole chapters. Now, Thomas, of course, he wants a road map so he can find Jesus after he's gone. So then Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. So basically, you don't really need directions, Thomas, because you have me. Now, this section gets used in an exclusionary manner often, but that's not what it's meant to be. Jesus is trying to comfort his friends and assure them that they will see him again after the ascension. This is a promise, not a prohibition. And these are words of comfort, not words of condition. Their future is secure because of their relationship with Jesus. So he says, I'll paraphrase, I have to go now, but remember what I taught you, and you'll be fine. Then Philip, poor Philip, asked to see God, which is also a big no-no. Moses declared that no one can see God. And John also says that at the beginning of John, if you go back. But Jesus explains that he's God's dwelling place on earth, so God is in him, and we can see God through him and each other, and in all the works that we do in Jesus' name. We see God through Jesus and through his life, his actions, and his teaching. And then we also see Jesus in other people. And then he says that we're going to do works that are greater than his. So you might be thinking, how could I possibly do works greater than Jesus? Is that what you're thinking? That's what you're thinking now. No? All right. Everyone's half asleep today. Oof. Well, Jesus performed miracles, signs, and he healed people. He comforted. He raised the dead. He forgave. He welcomed. So what can we possibly do that's greater than that? I can't touch someone and heal them, even though I do know one lady who would argue with me on that. That's another story. So remember, though, that not everyone who Jesus healed became a follower of his or a believer in him. Some just walked away and kept on going. Think about the story of the 10 lepers who were healed, and 9 of them left, and 1 said thanks and then left. They still all left. The miracles aren't the main point. The point is to have a relationship with God. And what we can do that is greater is through our community, through our tribe, we can bring people to God and continue on in the mission. Caroline Lewis explains that the greater works are being the presence of Jesus in the world. Jesus only ministered for a short time, but we've been around for a very long time. Look at the legacy of good that was left behind and the good that we can do in his name. So yes, this part of the passage is a goodbye, and we read it at funerals quite often, but it isn't about life after our own deaths. This is all about our lives after Jesus' death. Okay? He's not physically around, so he's telling the disciples how they're going to live on without him there. So Jesus, who came from God's dwelling place, now has to go back. Elizabeth Johnson writes that if we want to know God, we need look no further than Jesus. All the words that Jesus has spoken, all the works he has done come from God and show us who God is. She continues, Jesus promises to be with us through the power of the Spirit, to work in and through us to accomplish his purposes in the world. And this does not necessarily happen in easily visible and spectacular ways. Yet, wherever there is healing, reconciling, life-giving work happening, this is the work of God. These are the greater works that we can do. And if we come together as a community and work together, there's nothing that we can't do to make these greater works happen in the world and to make God's mission happen in the world. Just to make the world better, of course, while we're still alive. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.